Hi, I'm Rob Hubbard, and I am hanging out here with Clive Shepherd and Kathy Moore. I think fair to say two of the leading learning designers in the world. So we've got half an hour together to explore some of Clive and Kathy's work, some of their thoughts, and some of their ideas on the subject of learning design and user experience as well. So Clive, I mean, first of all, for the benefit of those watching, can you tell us a bit about the kind of work and the kind of approaches that you take to learning design, please?
Well, I think that for a long time, I regard myself as essentially a sort of learning technologist. So I was interested very much in the design of content, and I still am very interested in that. Although even in that sense, I don't think it's very much to do with technology. Most of the principles are pretty timeless. But over the last 10 years, I have explored design at all the levels, I think, from the sort of, I came up with this idea about a learning architect, which is very much looking at creating a sort of landscape for learning across an organization, which is sort of like big picture. But probably the thing I've spent most of my time on, and the thing perhaps that I feel most passionate about, is just the design of solutions, which you know, I call them blended solutions, and you know, whether that term is helpful or not, I don't really mind. But it's when you go into a client in your organization or an external client, and you have to come up with a solution to their problem, and that's the bit that I'm most interested in, because I think for learning professionals, that's, you know, what they have to do. So although that crosses over into informal learning in many different ways, and hopefully is embedded in an informal context or work-based context, I think that that's the bit which I think we need most to get right. And that's where, and I know Kathy, you know, is also very, very strongly interested in this area. That's where most of the mistakes are made, is we're in that initial contact with the client, and how you then engage with them to come up with a solution.
Absolutely. If you set the wrong course at the start, you're never going to get to the right destination. No. Brilliant. Thank you, Clive. And Kathy, could you tell us a bit about your work, please?
I have worked as a learning designer since 1983, something like that. Somewhere along the way, I developed the action mapping model of instructional design, which is an attempt to get learning designers in the corporate world to consider the justification for the training. When somebody comes to us and says, we need training in X, we should not just obediently produce the training they ask for, because somebody is writing our checks. Who is that organization, and how are we going to justify that paycheck and the expense of that training? So even though arguably other people should have analyzed the problem and determined the best solution, it does often come to us. We're like the last people with the opportunity to say, wait a minute, let's actually analyze this problem and solve it. So it's a simple model that walks you through, as Clive said, the initial discussion with the client, super important to sort of reframe the discussion from, please develop a course for us, to please help us with this performance problem.
I mean, that's quite a change in role for someone who is a learning designer. That's more of a consultant's role. I mean, how do you help people to make that step?
Well, I think that you're right to hit upon this consultancy concept, because that's what it is really. And I think that you would regard a consultancy role as a professional role. And most people working in learning development would regard themselves as professionals. If you ask them, they always put their hand up and say, yes, I'm a professional. But unfortunately, professional behavior isn't our strong point. And in that initial meeting, in the sense that if you went to see a doctor and you said to the doctor, you know, I've been on the internet and I've checked out all my symptoms and all the different remedies, and I'd like you to, you know, just write me this prescription. And if they said yes, you'd think you'd had a pretty poor relationship with a professional. And you can mirror that with just about every expert that you engage with. If you buy a dog, you don't bark yourself. You know, you leave that to the dog. And I think that they're great people in learning development. They are such nice people and want so much to do a good job, but there's a lack of confidence to you know, even if they buy into the idea of actual mapping or asking the right questions, there's a lack of confidence, because I think often they're intimidated by the subject experts, the budget holders, the you know, whoever it is that's kicking off the project, and that you know, I think there's a sort of confidence building as well as a sort of mind shifting process needed. which I think is more than having being able to ask the right questions. I'm not sure what the solution is, but I'm feeling more and more that people need coaching through this process of building their confidence, so that whatever model they use, they feel that they are they are a genuine professional. They do have expertise that the client doesn't have. That they have the right to say, hold on, and let's analyze it a bit more, and they deserve the support that's required to build that professional and credibility. And I think that's a tough nut to crack.
I think what we need is a cultural change, both in the organizations and how they view learning and development, but also in the preparation of people that end up in these roles. Because, for example, in the US, the instructional design degrees that I'm familiar with are all about learning theory. How do we get information into people's brains? That's all they talk about. And so they graduate from that with no experience in business, no knowledge of how business works and what they care about, and no feeling, I have the right to say, let's make sure this is really a training problem. And they don't even necessarily have classes in how to analyze a performance problem. It's all about the information in the brain. So I think I would lay the blame also on the formal preparation for instructional designers.
And it's interesting over here that we don't really have degrees in learning design or instructional design, and the people that come into this discipline, they come from all kinds of different backgrounds. Lots of musicians, interestingly. You're a musician.
We're all musicians here.
That's right. Sorry, is it banjo?
It was banjo, yes. Now it's accordion.
It's accordion.
Bad accordion.
Very good. Accordion's a great instrument. Fantastic. But yeah, so we have these people coming in from all these kind of different backgrounds, and I think generally they won't have any kind of consultancy experience in that background. They might be people who are creative writers, they might be people who are developers, they might be journalists, sometimes they're artists, they're all these different things, but that's something that's very often missing from the experience they've got, and it's critical, to go from being a L&D function that just delivers training and be easily cut to something that actually delivers value to the business.
Some of that is analytical consulting skills, and being able to analyze a problem and come up with a good proposal and evaluate it and all those things. But a lot of it's interpersonal skills too, and the traditional way of building interpersonal skills, I suppose you might have scenarios and things along the line, but eventually you have to actually engage with other human beings and practice it, and the dreaded role play thing. But I actually do believe that there's a lot of rehearsal of those interactions needed before you feel really confident to do them. I don't think we've ever approached it that way. What's really made me think that is I had a great experience the other week with it's a German researcher who's been working on a I think I told you about it, on a sort of a way of reading body language and things in a video Skype call, and giving you feedback on your negotiating skills from not just from what happens in terms of what you say, but in terms of how are you coming across in body language. But that's not so much the key thing. That's all a bit space agey. But the actual one-to-one, we had a trial, role playing, which we were briefed on our positions, that we did a half-hour role play in Skype. It was a brilliant role play, but not like that sort of exercise in humiliation where you're in a workshop with 15 other people watching you. It was you could genuinely experiment, and I do believe that if I was designing a consultancy skills course now, which is very much on my mind, what would I do? And I had to do it remotely and couldn't do it in a classroom. I would do a lot of one-to-one video-based interviews. And, after you've done everything else, once they've got the models, once they know, all the theory and everything else, but just to get that confidence in doing it. And it's just a really traditional interpersonal skills technique, but I would do that.
Dick Hanshaw in the US has some nice videos on his site that are helping learning designers also develop the consultative stuff. And I think also one thing that would help is for organizations to stop expecting the learning designer to do everything from the consultative conversation through to creating HTML5 presentations and interactions. They're expecting them to to wear 15,000 hats.
Yeah, absolutely.
There should be some division of roles. There should be the kind of solutions person, and then a developer should be a separate role.
I agree. I do think that there's, people talk about teaching people about learning technologies, but to be honest, nearly all of the real issues have nothing to do with learning technology. I mean, in a way, the last thing you need is a lot of technical knowledge. And as you say, it's probably a stretch too far. I did have one client where, which I'm not going to say it is obviously, but where they had an internal department where they were teaching everybody in this internal development department how to do 3D modeling, how to do programming in Flash action script. This was quite a while ago.
Yeah.
You go on. They were absolutely frazzled, and they had no idea what they were doing, had nowhere near enough practice to learn the skills anyway. But it was an absolutely disastrous, way to get them into the world of learning technologies. And they really are. These are lifetime career jobs, aren't they? People do it all their lives. You can't just dip in, and one day you're an animator, the next day you're a programmer. It doesn't work.
I mean, when I'm talking to organizations and helping them set up teams, I always encourage them to look at, ask the people that are involved, what are you into? Not just at work, what are you into at home? Yeah. It's like, oh, well, I really like taking photos. Fantastic. Do you want to do some more of that? And someone who's a musician, it's like, great, you can be our sound person if you're up for it. Trying to align it with their interests, rather than expecting everyone to do everything.
Well, everybody brings something to the party. I mean, the accordion player might sometimes have a role, or whatever.
Not my accordion player at this point.
But I mean, you obviously bring something to the party. You can't be expected to bring everything. We're not all Leonardos, are we? Really?
Yeah.
Well, you might be.
No.
I mean, I do see design. I mean, I'm obviously highly biased because I've always been a designer, and part of that career as a learning designer. But before then, automotive, CAD/CAM, electromechanical, and studied at university. And for me, kind of good design just underpins everything. Everything that we're talking about and hearing about in the keynote about, the robots are coming, everybody panic, and the way that we should interact with AIs and so forth. All of that is design. Design of services. It all comes down to these kind of principles. And for me, the single most important attribute of any designer is their ability to empathize with the end users. And I think if you're not a very empathetic person, then you're not really going to be able to design a good solution for people because you don't understand them. Or do you think empathy is something that can be taught, that can be developed in people?
That's a deep psychological question. I don't know if I'm qualified to answer.
No, I'm not sure either whether it can be taught, but I did read a really good book about 3 or 4 months ago called Humans Are Underrated. But the main thesis of the book was that, with all the changes in technology, a lot of what were middle-class jobs in accountancy, law, also middle management, will be lost to computers. And in fact, quite a lot of computing jobs too would be lost to computers. But the one common factor in endless job advertisements is need for empathy, ability to get on with customers, get on with other people, work in teams. The interesting thing in the book they said was that just as the job, the jobs will not be lost, the jobs which involve empathy, because computers can't do that.
I don't know. I think you will be able to. We're going a little bit.
Just finish that story very quickly, because there's another side to it. But there is an empathy test apparently, which is quite reliable, I'm told, where scores are going down in empathy while the need for empathy jobs is going up. And I think that's, which is an interesting thing. No one's quite sure what it is. Everybody can jump on their bandwagon and say it's because we're spending too much time online.
Supposedly connected.
But I don't know about you, what you guys think, but I think that one of the sort of big sort of realizations I've had in the last month or so is that, in design, in your interactions with learners, whether it's through the medium of a computer or it's direct, particularly in the medium of a computer, it has to be a very much as if it was a human-to-human relationship. And so that sort of empathetic approach, a very human approach, matters as much when you're designing for online as it does when you're designing for
even more
teaching.
because you can't see their reactions. You can't see them checking out or looking at you or anything. You have to imagine this person. And one of the recommendations I make, which is really difficult for a lot of people in their jobs, is, okay, if you've decided training is part of the solution and it's going to be self-paced e-learning, like the most difficult, you really have to go to those learners and follow them around on their jobs and see what their context is like. Don't just rely on what the subject matter expert tells you. Go there, look at them, talk to them. Take their job aids from the Post-it notes on their monitor and use those. And that way you'll meet flesh and blood people that you can then think about as you're designing. Do I really want to make Victoria sit through this? No, actually. Let her look it up.
It's very much a design thinking approach. I went to a great talk from one of the consultants at IDEO. So, you know, one of the world's leading design consultancies who I have a massive intellectual crush on. I think they're absolutely brilliant. But, you know, and very much design thinking is just, it's a design process that's been around for years, but a key part of that is observing the people that you're designing a solution from. And that's not just asking them questions. It is literally just watching them go about their daily business and observing things and getting insights from them. But the really interesting thing, because we do a lot of work with a marketing agency and with their customers, and it is exactly the same process as a marketing design process. You know, you gather lots of data, you observe, you ask questions, and from that you try and generate insights, and then from the insights come these things called propositions, which are essentially the solutions to your design problem, and then you prototype them and try them out, and then you build them and launch them and measure them and iterate and improve them. And it's really interesting to go to another field and see what we do or what we should be doing mirrored there as well.
It's that very user-centered design process, which it used to be that nobody I knew would ever admit to ever consulting a learner in design. But more recently, I've been hearing more success stories there. People,
I think this type of thinking is percolating finally.
It is finally, I mean, they're the most important stakeholders, aren't they? If you design, and if you don't involve the user, this is how I explain it on projects we do. If you don't involve the users from the start of the project, the risk in your project goes through the roof, because you know you're far more likely to produce something that comes out at the end. They go, yeah, we know all of that. We get it off this YouTube video over here, or no, I don't get it. It's too complicated. Or
I think the biggest risk is of over-engineering. And I remember on user-centered design, I read a book called "The Inmates Are in Charge of the Asylum," but it was mainly about software design. But the main thing I'm saying there is never ever let software engineers design software. I mean, they can build it but not design it, because they always over-engineer it. They always think that more features are better than less features. But you know, the user-centered design in software engineering, the most common thing that they come out with is the fact that your typical user wants the simplest, most stress-free experience they possibly can have. And they want as little as possible, not as much as possible. And I think that that's one of the things which I believe about learning content is that, you know, learning is quite stressful. You know, you have to concentrate hard, and sometimes it unsettles your model of the world, and that's not very nice. And you might enjoy it afterwards, but you don't often enjoy it during. You know, you enjoy the having got there, but not the getting there. And I think that, you know, in that situation, it is stressful, and that anything you can do to reduce the stress so that, you know, you get to your learning goal as easily as possible has to be a good thing. And it usually means simpler rather than more complicated.
We shouldn't make it easy, though. You know, I think we were discussing this yesterday. I think if a piece of learning that you go for, if it feels easy, you either knew it already or you haven't really learned, really got it.
Well, the stress is in the challenge, meeting the challenges. It's not in operating the system.
Not an operating, like the e-learning that people used to make, where you enter the virtual office and you have to find the virtual receptionist and then open the thing to find out. You spend all this time navigating this fictional world. Those drove me nuts. It's just bail.
Absolutely.
Well, something I'm really interested in, I'm sure many of the viewers are as well, is that now increasingly work is social. You know, people have social networks that they're using for work. The expectation is that learning is becoming increasingly social, and that's a really good thing, clearly, peer-to-peer and collaborative. What are the impacts of that on our jobs as learning designers? Kathy?
Well, we ourselves, like I said earlier, need to be more social. We need to go and sit with the learner and watch them do their job. And stalk them online, if a lot of it happens online, if there's online chats where they're asking each other questions and solving problems, we can see what are their challenges, how are they thinking about it. I think we over-depend on the subject matter expert because they're the expert. They may not be exactly the expert on what it's like to be the learner because they are an expert. They're not actually necessarily doing the job. And when it comes to actually finding solutions, I think I'm a big fan of social in the sense that people help each other see things in a different way, apply new models, things like that. It starts to get a little risky when there is specific information that needs to be accurate. And then I'm actually a fan of the more hierarchical approach of here is the official curated information that you guys should be relying on. And I also disagree with some people who are saying, we don't need to design anything now because you can just ask your colleagues. But I've seen that in difficult, complex, professional things like instructional design, I think we do actually need some structure on how to learn how to do it. And not just pick it up as we go along from random people.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. And I think that often people who advocate the most free-for-all approach are people who are typically very advanced in their careers with elaborate mental models of the world. They don't need structure and support. But most of our effort is actually with beginners in a subject who absolutely are in no position to just go out there and explore. They absolutely do need structure. But I do think, coming back to the point about social is, and how relevant is it? I think that my view is, and it's no more than the view, is that there is quite a strong urge to externalize what you've learned, to tell other people, look what I've learned, to test things out against other people, and generally to get it out of your system and share it. And I think that even if there's no social element in our blend, people will do it anyway, in the sense that they'll talk to their families and friends and their people at work, and they'll sort of do it anyway. I don't think we should think that if we don't manage it, it doesn't happen. I think it does happen, but that just simple combinations sometimes of the way that you have a YouTube video with then an ability to make a comment or something like that can often be all that's required to make that possible for you to express, wow, that was a great experience, I really enjoyed it, or that was rubbish, I really disagree for this reason. It's quite simple things, and it doesn't actually have to be in your content, it can be in the platform. But I think that even if it's not there, people will make it happen.
Absolutely. I mean, I come across people that contact us sometimes and they want to, we want to get peer-to-peer learning going within our organization. We want more social learning. It's like, well, do your people use telephones? Like, yes. Do they use email? Yeah. Do they talk in the corridor? Yeah. Well, you're already doing it. Don't look at this as something new that you're bringing in and you're now doing peer-to-peer learning. You already do it. You just want to enable it a bit more. Something I noticed, though, is that with kind of social and collaborative ways of working and ways of learning, a lot of it depends on the culture of the organization. So I'm really interested in this idea at the moment of kind of culturally sensitive choice of technology and use of technology. So if you've got an organization which is very hierarchical, it's very command and control, it's very knowledge-based, people's positions of power are based on the years they've been in role and what they know, not what they share. A big open to everybody social network. Hey, everybody, come and share your ideas. Come and ask a really stupid question in front of everybody in the company. It's just not going to fly. You need a particular kind of cultures to do that. Quite often we find people are seduced by our industry buzzwords, which we all love, don't we? So, social and collaborative learning, gamification is this year's, AI sounds like it's going to be the one for next year. And people want to do something in that area. But as a designer, I think it's important to understand the culture and keep that in mind as you're designing as well. I mean, have you got any views on that or examples or ideas, Clive?
Well, from my point of view, I think you can't. Most learning professionals are not in a position to change a culture. They're not. It's probably asking too much. Unless they've got permission from the board, to say, we need a change of culture, can you help us do it? Well, that's fine. That's a golden opportunity. But most times you're working within an organization, you haven't got the remit to change it, and they don't want you to change it. In which case, you're right, absolutely, be situational and develop a architecture for that organization which suits their, the way they do business. You're not going to put the same thing in a manufacturing company as you will do it in a software development company. And I absolutely agree. I think a little bit of common sense. So we can't all jump on the same bandwagon.
No,
and if we did, they'd collapse.
Yeah, yeah. Kathy.
Well, I agree that every organization and every country, every society has a culture that's going to affect what we do to some degree. And so as designers, we can't design something, for example, for the US and then install it in Colombia and expect it to work. It's not going to. If it's self-paced e-learning in particular, you try to make it fly in a more collaborative group culture, you're going to struggle.
Yeah. I find one size fits all just means it's poorly fitted to everybody, apart from maybe a very small segment. And whilst that is attractive from a efficiency point of view and a cost and time scales, if people don't use it, then that effort is wasted. And it's not just your effort and the cost of producing it. Of course, the far bigger cost is everybody's time of going through something that they're just not connecting with. That's always a challenge. I mean, as a designer, Kathy, how do you go about being aware of that and not doing the one size fits all, but without, have you found ways that you literally don't have to build multiple versions of things?
I'm a huge fan of doing low tech, as little informal structure as you can get away with, and putting as much control as possible in the learner's hands, which was sort of the theme of yesterday's session that I did, of throw them in the deep end, which means give them a challenge right away. Don't teach it them first. Give them a challenge, and in that challenge, they can pull the information that they need. So you have people who enjoy risk will not read the instructions first, they'll dive right in. People who are more cautious or beginners will read stuff before they try it. Everybody can choose what they need. And if this activity is used in a more social culture, they can run it as a group. If it's a more antisocial culture like the US, they can do it alone at their computers. So and because it's not relying on some special technology, maybe it's just a simple branching scenario in Twine, it doesn't require anything really.
Yeah, very good. And they tailor the experience themselves as they go through it.
It's the design, not the technology. It's the idea, not the LMS.
Yeah, very good. And Clive, so within your blends, how do you allow that tailoring?
This whole issue of adaptivity is quite a complex one. I mean, I obviously do agree that if you're able to, if the learner's self-aware enough of what they need to know to be able to navigate a sort of guided discovery type approach, I think that's absolutely fabulous. If it suits that subject, I'm not absolutely sure it suits everything, because I'm a bit concerned about those situations you were talking about earlier, Kathy, about where people, there's absolute must know stuff, which is absolutely, and you're a complete novice, and so in those situations, would I prefer the adaptivity to come from a recommendation from a human being? I might do. And that's where the sort of empathetic teacher relationship comes in. But I do think there is scope for adaptive software. We're seeing it in apps and things where they've got millions of people in their audience. We don't normally have the same ability to create AI interfaces for corporate things. But I do see some potential there for adaptive software. And all that effort in AI hopefully will pay off for our world, as it's obviously paying off in terms of big ticket software. But I'd have to say most of the times I'm in the same situation as Kathy. You keep it simple because we don't have time or the money or anything else to.
And it's more portable. I mean, even a text-only scenario, branching scenario, it's going to be, it's difficult enough to create because it's a branching scenario. If you try to start adding audio and video and this and that, it just gets even more unwieldy. And in my little informal tests, they like the text-only scenarios. It's fine that way.
That's interesting.
So there's no reason to go into this overkill.
I had exactly the same feedback this morning about a scenario. Someone said, I'm really pleased to have video in it, when I just said we were going to put video in it, but we couldn't afford to do it. So we did it. We kept it really simple and on a responsive interface and everything. And it ended up as text. I said, that's exactly what I wanted.
Very good.
Isn't that interesting?
I've done I run a scenario design course, and at one point when we talk about media, I make everybody, without any warning, I send them to a link and I say, go through this scenario. and it's an old one with a purple screen and text. It's the most hideous design you could imagine. And everybody gets into the story immediately. They go through and they come back into the webinar room reporting, I ended up dead in a ditch, you know. And then I say, did you notice that there were no photos? No. Did you care that you couldn't, there were no pictures of the characters? No. Would you want pictures of the characters? No. They prefer to imagine them.
So that's because it was so well written, though. That's the thing. It was a story that brought them in. You know, that's the thing. You know,
in the same way, you don't moan because your novel doesn't have pictures. You know, you know, good writing will sustain it. Good writing is not an easy skill.
No, it's not. And there are certainly situations in which you would want video, for example, if it's like practicing a difficult conversation, something like that. But for a lot of scenarios, I think we put too much effort into adding bling that the learners actually prefer not to have.
Yeah, I spent the first few years of my career trying to convince people to put more interactivity into the stuff that we were building for them, and now I try to convince them to take it out. So, well, I think we're at about time there. So that's been a brilliant conversation, as always. So thank you, Kathy Moore. Thanks, Clive Shepherd.
Thanks, Rob.
And I hope you've enjoyed viewing this and you've enjoyed our conversation. So from Learning Technologies 2016, goodbye for now.
Goodbye.